está grabando ya.
Buenas tardes. El Museo de la Mujer y el British Council se honran en presentar a Janet Winterson, Susie Orbach, Aline Peterson y Claudia Lucotti en la literatura escrita por mujeres en el siglo XXI, México y Gran Bretaña. También les va a dirigir algunas palabras Nina Milosevic. Por favor.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the British Council, I would like to thank you all for coming this afternoon. I have to say, first of all, that I'm deeply moved to be in this building, which I understand opened only a year and a half ago, and is a museum through which we can understand Mexico through women's eyes. And I congratulate you for what you've achieved in this year and a half. It's beautiful and moving to be here. And what a great venue for us this afternoon, so thank you for hosting us. On that note, I will hand back the microphone. Thank you.
love technology. Don't we all love technology? So you probably hear me if I project loud enough, but we'll make do with the best we can of these microphones as well. I'm going to ask all four of our authors to tell you more about their lives and their careers and their preoccupations as writers. And then we'll have probably a bit of a panel discussion between the five of us, and then very quickly after that we'll open it up to you. So please do feel free to ask questions, think about questions directed either at the panel in general or to any individual author. I'll start on my right with Jeanette Winterson. She's one of the finest writers in English, in any language. Many consider her to be one of the great writers of her generation. She won the Whitbread Award with her first novel, Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit. She's gone on to win many other awards ever since. To my left, Susie Orbach, who is a psychotherapist, a psychoanalyst, and a writer. She wrote one of the seminal books on feminism and body image in 1981, the year I was born, and it depresses me more than I can say to tell you that things have not moved on very much in the 31 years since that book was written, and yet Susie is still right at the forefront of those arguments, of that discourse, and is not only a writer and a therapist in huge demand, she's also an activist and a campaigner. She was behind an incredibly powerful advertising campaign in the UK and I believe worldwide for the brand Dove, and that was a campaign to start depicting real women in advertising and in order to sell consumer goods such as shampoos and deodorants and those everyday things that we all have to use. And it's really been tireless elsewhere in her work to make sure that the debate around emotional intelligence and about the relationship that women and men to a certain extent have with their bodies is continually being addressed. I'm also going to introduce our two Mexican writers, Claudia. Oh, Aline, sorry, wrong way around. We'll start on this side. Claudia Lucotti is a professor of English literature at UNAM in the philosophy and literature department, and she's a poet, she's an essayist, she's a very fine writer, and I believe we haven't had a long time to talk, so I'm really looking forward to hearing more about her thoughts on this, but is vitally committed to women having more representation and more social relevance elsewhere, not only in the literary world. Aline Peterson is a novelist. She writes of heartbreak, of loss, of loneliness, relatively universal themes in literature, I would say, and at the heart of all of that, miscommunication. She's very influenced by Greek mythology and also authors who, once again, really exemplify the idea that we can all, to borrow a wonderful phrase of Jeanette's, meet on the steps of the story. Her influences include Mark Twain, Charles Dickens, Virginia Woolf, Marcel Proust. I'm sure most people in this room will be avid readers of some, if not all of those authors. So I think maybe we can start just go on this way, as you are able to tell us a bit more about your life, a bit more about your work and your literary preoccupations, and where that intersects with gender studies as well, if it's relevant.
No, it's all right. Buenas tardes, estoy muy contenta de estar aquí compartiendo esta mesa y dado que pensé que era una buena idea sistematizar las cosas, escribí un pequeño texto cuyo título es El cuerpo del texto y empieza así. No creo en la división tajante de la escritura por género. Creo sí en sus diversos matices, producto de quien se es, sexo, orientación sexual, época, intereses concretos. Y es claro que las mujeres hemos debido recorrer un camino largo y difícil para penetrar por las puertas diversas de la actividad humana. En el caso de México, de tradición católica de origen español y por tanto de criterios sumamente angostos, la lucha ha sido ardua. Y si en Gran Bretaña se obtuvo el voto en 1928, Sería hasta 1953 que se consiguió en México. Empezaré por presentarme. Nací aquí en 1938. Ya lo dijo ella, fui una ávida lectora infantil que me llevó a escribir desde entonces. Metida en las historias de los libros, quise continuar las aventuras de Tom Sawyer con un primo mexicano que yo le inventé y hacer lo mismo también con un compañero de orfanatorio de Oliver Twist. A muchas mujeres de mi generación, las familias les vetaban los estudios universitarios. Ese fue mi caso, aunque lo hice años después. Soy, como también ya dijo, soy novelista, cuentista, poeta y he escrito también para niños. Me gusta explorar con mucho cuidado en el interior de los personajes. No busco grandes héroes, sino gente común y corriente. He abordado el erotismo desde tiempos en que el tema no era frecuente en la escritura de mujeres en México. Mi última novela, Deseo, narra a través de instantes eróticos la vida de una mujer a partir de su infancia hasta su muerte en la vejez. En mis novelas son más abundantes los personajes centrales femeninos, aunque al menos en 3 de ellas y en varios cuentos será un hombre el protagonista. En realidad, yo diría que mi interés básico es acercarme a las incógnitas de la condición humana, a las grandes preguntas que todos nos hacemos, que incluyen la muerte, el amor, el tiempo, el conocimiento, el manejo del cuerpo. Ahora voy a referirme como un antecedente luminoso a la escritora más connotada que ha dado México, la monja del siglo XVII, Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, quien además de una formidable obra literaria de varios géneros, escribió sobre la desigualdad con las mujeres y lo hizo en 1691 en una carta que fue publicada entonces de respuesta al obispo que la había reprendido por sus actividades intelectuales tan poco femeninas. Se trata de una notable y extraordinariamente culta defensa de su amor por el conocimiento, remarcando su condición de mujer. De hecho, ella dijo en esa carta que si Aristóteles hubiera sabido cocinar, hubiera escrito mucho mejor. Entre su obra se encuentra un poema, hasta hace algunos años recitado con mucha frecuencia y que comienza así: hombres necios que acusáis a la mujer sin razón. Su sólida fama literaria perdura con gran fuerza hasta hoy en las letras de todo el mundo de habla hispana. Señalo que la vindicación de los derechos de la mujer de Mary Wollstonecraft, documento fundamental en la defensa de las causas femeninas, se publicará en Gran Bretaña 100 años después, o 99 para ser exactos, y las mujeres siguieron y siguen luchando por sus derechos. Y en el siglo XX, la primera escritora de la que quiero hablar es Josefina Vicens, 1911, cuyo magnífico El libro vacío cambió la tónica de lo escrito hasta entonces en México al abordar el tema mismo de la escritura con un trasfondo cercano al existencialismo y con un asunto eterno, el de la creación. El libro ha tenido desde que se publicó en 1958 hasta la fecha la característica de ser incapaz de envejecer. Josefina Vicens fue una mujer que empezó a trabajar a los 14 años y lo hizo toda su vida hasta el momento ya vieja en que quedó ciega. Era lesbiana en tiempos sumamente difíciles para la aceptación de preferencias sexuales diversas. Fue una activista social, defensora de las mujeres, los campesinos y la industria cinematográfica. Ella misma era guionista. Publicó solo 2 novelas y en ambas sus protagonistas son masculinos. Tocó con mucha inteligencia y sensibilidad el prolongado machismo de México. y en opinión de los lectores hombres, sus personajes son perfectamente creíbles, y yo añado, conmovedores. En las letras de México es una de las figuras importantes del siglo XX. Desde la fecha de nacimiento de Josefina Vicens hasta la de Margot Glantz, se pueden mencionar, resumiendo de una manera muy drástica, al menos a dos escritoras emblemáticas, Elena Garro y Rosario Castellanos. Sin embargo, en esta ocasión proseguiré con Margot Glantz 1930. Voy a comentar hoy sobre autoras que se aventuran en direcciones arriesgadas literariamente. Margot Glantz tiene una muy sólida trayectoria académica en la que ha profundizado, por ejemplo, en Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, escritora con quien inicié yo este breve panorama. Sus investigaciones sobre la célebre monja y otras más y sus respectivos escritos a lo largo de los 300 años del México colonial se tradujeron, además de en doctos ensayos, en una novela, Apariciones. La obra creativa de Glantz se apoya con frecuencia en la fragmentación que no respeta orden cronológico o temático. Puede señalarse su agrado también en tocar con distancia y con un granito de sal temas frívolos. En sus libros está presente su erudición de muchas facetas, pero además se muestran relatos alrededor del sexo con sus inherentes perversiones, así como las preferencias en gusto y hábitos usuales del género femenino. De manera especial, la moda, sintetizada en la pasión personal de la autora por el calzado, que da origen al libro Historia de una mujer que caminó por la vida con zapatos de diseñador. A Glantz le interesa la exploración acuciosa del cuerpo. Menciono un muy inquietante relato, Zona de Derrumbe, acerca de la amenaza del cáncer y el tiempo literariamente dilatado de un estudio de mastografía con el temor inescapable y todas las indignidades del proceso. Margot Glantz publicó antes un texto muy celebrado de corte autobiográfico, Genealogías, acerca de la procedencia judeorrusa de sus padres, y entre los más recientes menciono la novela El Rastro y Saña, constituido este último libro de fragmentos de varias obsesiones suyas, como las artes visuales, la música, los espectáculos y cierto regodeo en la violencia y el horror. Acaba de salir ahora Coronada de Moscas, sus impresiones de varios viajes a la India, y es que Margot Glantz es una joven mujer de 82 años, incansable viajera por lo ancho y largo del mundo, el mundo de las letras, el arte, la música y las propias ciudades del oro. Ana Clavel, 1961, también es transgresora en su obra y también estudió letras. Sus relatos se apoyan en una seria investigación sobre los elementos que refuerzan las historias. Me parece que su interés por el sexo, el erotismo y las conductas poco convencionales, así como por la fuerza de su pluma, la hacen una escritora interesante. En sus novelas y cuentos, la mirada se detiene en la exploración del cuerpo. Esa mirada consigue ensanchar las posibilidades de su escritura. En Cuerpo Náufrago, apoyado en el Orlando de Virginia Woolf, el personaje femenino, al despertarse hombre, tiene acceso lúdicamente a diversos tipos de mingitorios. El libro mismo los va mostrando en fotografías y su portada es el cuadro intervenido de Anne Lafuente, en que ésta es sustituida por un urinario. Podría decirse que se trata de un viaje de iniciación simbolizado en dicho objeto. Ana Clavel publicó también un libro de ensayos donde toca el tema de la metamorfosis. Otro de sus libros habla del incesto, el deseo perverso de un padre por su hija, En este caso, se ofrece de nuevo la intertextualidad, ahora con el escritor uruguayo Felisberto Hernández, nacido a principios del siglo XX, en cuya novela Las Hortensias aparece la hechura de muñecas sexuales que sustituyen a mujeres de carne y hueso. En Las violetas son flores del deseo, el padre las fabrica y vende con éxito, sublimando de este modo su propio deseo prohibido. Estamos aquí, pues, entre tres tipos de flores: clavel, que es carnation, hortensias y violetas de un jardín clandestino. Añado que Ana Clavel acaba de publicar un volumen de cuentos, amor y otros suicidios, y suele grabar videos para recrear su obra. Por último, unas palabras sobre Guadalupe Nettel, 1973. Ya casi nos acercamos a tu fecha de nacimiento. Bueno, quien ha vivido desde niña entre México y Francia y es doctora en letras. Me parece que el adjetivo inicial para calificar su obra sería inquietante, seguido por la afirmación de su buena factura. Ha publicado libros de cuento, ensayo, novelas. La última, El cuerpo en que nací, de rasgos autobiográficos, narra su desfase infantil con su cuerpo, familia y los dos países de residencia, y manifiesta asimismo una dosis de ironía. Su temática la inclina a abordar a outsiders, personajes lisiados del cuerpo o emocionalmente, o circunstancias que resultan amenazantes, lo oscuro que hay en los seres. En El huésped, su primera novela, la niña se siente habitada por un ente extraño, y así no sorprende que Nettel tenga también un libro de ensayos sobre Julio Cortázar. A medida que pasa el tiempo en El huésped y en la vida adulta, la protagonista perderá la vista e irá incorporándose al mundo de los cielos. Guadalupe Nettel es una escritora que se asoma a las esquinas de lo diferente, explorando esas regiones ocultas o disimuladas que paralelamente nos habitan, pero que con frecuencia preferiríamos ignorar. En las escritoras aquí mencionadas, el cuerpo es central en su obra, por diferente, por traicionado, por recuperado para el panorama pleno de lo humano. Para terminar, me gustaría decir que aunque algunos autores de ambos sexos han manejado y manejan humor e ironía, la escritura mexicana no abunda mucho en ese envidiable tono británico. Somos más solemnes en general, pero el humor es siempre una buena medicina. Gracias.
Okay. We don't have very much time, so all I'll say is that if you want to read any of my books, they're available in Spanish, and you can get them from Lumen, who publish them in Spanish, most of them, so you won't have to read them in English if you don't want to, or you can read them both together. I was at the Frida Kahlo Museum earlier today, and I've been very moved by that experience and being here tonight in this museum of women. And I want to say that we need to continue to make space for ourselves as women, as human beings and as artists, in the work that we do and in the books that we read. It's very important that all of us go on supporting women and remember that our place in the world is equal to men, and our work in the world is equal to men. Whatever that work is, whatever we do, whether we're artists, whether we're not artists, it doesn't really make any difference. And when I look around here, when I look at Frida Kahlo's work today, I'm just reminded how long the journey has been, how difficult it is, how much we need to believe in ourselves, and that when there are women writers that we can read, we don't read them just because they're women, I hope, but we read them because women offer us a different sensibility, a different language, above all a different story, because our story of the world isn't the same as the normal male story of the world. We have our own way of telling stories, our own way of understanding stories. I'll answer any questions later if you want to ask me them, but otherwise that's all I have to say.
Okay, I will be even briefer. No, I'd like to say that I teach English literature at the UNAM, where we are really excited at having Janet and Susie. Teachers and students are sort of in touch with the work. Letras Inglesas does a good job in UNAM, basically, where lots of women teachers there, and we brought a lot of gender studies, feminism, post-colonialism. At first we were looked at with, a look of pity on the part of los grandes maestros universitarios. Feminism smelled rather peculiar to them. But we've stuck to it, and now many of them have, slowly started. They've discovered Virginia Woolf and lots of good things. And, basically we're at it slowly, but always working and combining what we teach with what we do, with what we translate, with what we read, because a lot of this is not just, in class, it's also outside in life. And just one thing to Janet, I was born in Buenos Aires, and I remember during the military government, people, a friend came from Britain, and she was one of the first persons I heard talking about feminism. And we all said to her, shut up, there are far more terrible things you've got to fight against than male oppression. And she said, till you don't start thinking and working on that, this world won't change, and you'll have one military government after another in one shape or the other. And I think it was true. So your words reminded me of that.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm very moved to be here as well. The Women's Library in Britain, which is a magnificent archive and exhibition space, was just threatened. So it's very refreshing to come here to see a new women's library. And yes, we found out this week that it's been saved, but not without tremendous political organizing. And I suppose that's where I come from as a writer, is that I came as part of the second wave of feminism in Europe and North America. And I was very interested in why women who had the economic possibility not to be oppressed continued to have an internal structure that held them back, that they had internalized a femininity that constrained them. And it was that led me to look at psychoanalysis as a way of trying to understand the unconscious processes and how we come to be who we are. But my generation had to remake psychoanalysis, and we had to put at the center of the story not the father-daughter relationship, but the mother-daughter relationship. And that changed completely how psychoanalysis and psychotherapy and the therapy relationship and the psychological development, if you listen to women, what they're actually talking about and what their experiences. And of course, all women are daughters. So we were listening to mothers who were daughters and daughters who were daughters and daughters who would be mothers. And my writing came out of a wish to try to talk about what I was understanding from the consulting room about the way that women's conflicted ambitions existed, how women had been brought up to care for others, to see their primary role as to be midwives and make life possible for everybody else. And that enormous shame and confusion attached to their own desires and their own needs, their own longings, they didn't even have a word for their own wishes or sexuality, but that those ideas were only understood in opposition to something. And it's taken many, many years through women's literature and women talking for women to actually be able to hear themselves speak and to write their own words and write their own stories and imaginative stories. So that's how I come to be here, and I'm very pleased to be here.
Just very briefly to pick up on your last point, Susie, before we open it out to all of you. The possibility of women being able to speak, to express themselves freely, to be able to write and to have a voice in the discourse that everyone should and could read. It's, as you say, it's been a long, hard journey, and there's still a very long way to go. But as we're here, and as I'm sitting with four such esteemed writers, I just would like to throw a question out there that picks up on this continual debate that we have certainly in the US and in the UK as to whether it's legitimate to categorise women's literature or women's writing, or whether, for example, the existence of a prize that celebrates only women's writing, whether that has any validity anymore. And I would be fascinated to have all of your takes on that before we go any further.
I'm just speaking for myself. I don't know if it works or not. I do think that the fighting has changed in years because good things have happened to women throughout the years. And I do believe that if I belong to an all-women group as a writer, I don't really like it that much, because I'm sure that there is a woman writer who writes detective stories and was not as close to me as could be a man writer who, let's say, Cervantes, for instance. I would think I would have more in common with him than I would have with this Osa Lasso writing detective stories. So I do believe that there is a saying in Spanish, union makes mighty. And women have to be together to fight for their rights, but I don't believe you have to stay in a niche all the time, because I think it's impoverishing. I feel myself, I am a writer who is a woman.
I think it's important to remember that the male world is not the normal world, and it's not the objective world, and it's not the universal world. Everything in life is propositional, and we act as though it's actually a law of gravity. This is not so. So it's important as women to go on making that space for ourselves that I was talking about earlier. And I think certainly in the UK, something like the Orange Prize has done a great deal of good. It's been really worthwhile, and it's been necessary. I hope that will change. I hope there'll be a point where women won't need to have those extra necessary spaces, but I'm not sure that we're there yet. Partly because it is women largely who buy fiction and who read fiction, but it is men largely who are seen to be important as writers. So there's something there that's not quite adding up in a particular way, and that is because I think as women, we're used to imagining that when men write, they are writing about the universal issues or the big issues, and that when women write, they're writing for other women. Men don't read books by women. I'm afraid this is a sorry and sad truth. Non-fiction they do, fiction they don't. I was reading some interesting statistics the other day, which is that 38% of men, certainly in England, only 38% of men are book buyers. And of that 38%, only 11% say that they read fiction by women. So there is something going on there which isn't quite right. And I think even men who are not, nice, ordinary, regular, non-sexist men who think that equality is important probably won't be as interested in picking up a book by a woman writer as they will picking up a book by a male writer. So there's still some education to be done. And as women, we don't have to worry about what we write. We simply write what we need to write in our own way, and we publish it in our own way. We get on with it. That's what we do. But we shouldn't imagine, as yet, in society, that things are so equal, that men and women are read in the same way. And you know all those ridiculous little tests that they do every so often. They take the names off exam papers and they ask men and women examiners to read the exam papers and then to mark them. And without fail, when they think it's a man writing, they give it a better mark, or they say it's interesting and bold. The same thing by a woman will be seen as chaotic, or avoiding the question, or not interesting enough. They do this again and again in the top universities just to test it, and the results are always the same, and they're always dismally gendered. And that's something that we haven't changed yet. We will change it, and I think all of us who are readers and writers need to go on working towards that change and remembering that it is proposition, and it's not simply that women write for women and men write for everybody. It's crazy.
Susie, do you still live in a dismally gendered world?
Well, I think that's really interesting what Jeanette said, because Marin Alsop, who's a North American conductor, greatly esteemed by Leonard Bernstein, said that women conductors only got women players in the orchestra as well as women conductors only got their jobs by being interviewed, by being auditioned behind a curtain. And that's really shocking. So I suppose I'm with Jeanette, I'm with everybody I think on this platform. We need special spaces, we really do. And I really hope that women can be read as speaking about universal experience as well as speaking about their own experience. But we're a long way off from it. I don't think my daughter thinks in any way the revolution has been won. I still think she thinks we have to fight it in terms of the capacity for women's voices to be heard.
There's a saying, no? We've got to be twice as good to get half the grade, or something like that. And this I read for the first time. It was stuck on the wall of one of the jefas de departamento in Filosofía y Letras. Just two other things. Well, in Mexico, for example, anthologies by women are getting going, and in many cases they're absolutely essential. I was in a workshop in San Cristóbal de las Casas in Chiapas, translating poetry from the indigenous languages into Spanish, and only male poets were invited, and a few women poets were standing outside the door or the window just listening. So I mean, they need their anthology, and a few facultadas, a sort of network we're trying to get going to support them. The other important thing in Mexico is that the book world is really a very elite world, where I think at least the basics of all this are reasonably understood. But in our, everyday world, the tragedy is television, for example. I mean, books are secondary there, where all these models are being reproduced without mercy, is film, but much, much worse, Mexican and imported television. Something should be done there.
Let's throw it open to the floor. If you have a question, please raise your hand. Let's start with this lady in the blue. Does that look like a work? Speak for example. Is there a microphone?
My question is for Janet Winterson. I would like to know what are your sources of inspiration when you write?
I'm not sure what that means. I don't, it doesn't work like that. You need to have already absorbed all those sources of inspiration before you write, or you're in real trouble. It would be like going to cook without any ingredients. But the thing about writers is you need to read as much as possible, and the more you read, and the more that's in you, the more that's likely to come out. So it's both everything that you've read, because all the dead writers are your friends, because in literature nobody is dead. They're just living in a different way. And if I ever get stuck, if there's something I can't manage, then I'll just go and speak to my dead friends, which in effect means looking along my bookshelves and picking out somebody that I want to talk to, which means just opening the book and having that quiet dialogue. That's how I always get past any difficulties. And it's knowing that it's much more than inspiration. It's knowing that you have all that already inside you, and then you engage with the world, and then you engage with the work. So it's a kind of threefold process, really. Everything that you know, the world that you live in, which is the life that you are, and then you yourself. And the thing then passes through you. You know, it's rather like the way that water passes through limestone and comes out with some particular flavour or taste to it. And the inspiration is everything that's happened before that, and goes on happening. You know, I don't think I've ever been bored, and a writer shouldn't be bored, because there's always something interesting in the world. There's always someone new to read. There's new writers to find. It's not just that you have to have the dead ones. You know, there are plenty of living ones too who will come along, and you make these voyages of discovery as you continue. So you yourself have to continue to develop in order to write at all. But it wouldn't really matter now. Suppose I was on a desert island now all by myself and there was nothing around. There's enough inside to keep going. And when people say to me, oh, I want to be a writer, what shall I do? Then I say to them two things. I say, well, write, because it's active. You can't want to be a writer. Either you are one or you're not, actually. It's very simple stuff. To ask how much is inside you that you can then draw on to bring outside of you. To me, that's the key.
Inspiration? Another question then. So just lady at the back. Say what? Okay, wait. Same. We'll go to it. Yeah, do it up. We'll come to you next, I promise. Alright. And it's okay for you to ask in Spanish if you are more comfortable.
Buenas tardes. ¿Aló? ¿Aló? No. Sí. Bueno, muchas gracias. Me alegra mucho estar aquí con ustedes escuchándolas. Yo en la actualidad estoy estudiando un doctorado en pedagogía en la UNAM y mi trabajo hace literatura escrita por mujeres en los años 80. Mi pregunta va a ser lo siguiente, en especial sobre cuál novela escrita por mujeres están leyendo ustedes ahora, mujeres del finales del siglo XX o del siglo XXI, pues todavía no hay que las publicadas. Pero ¿cuál novela están leyendo y también qué consideran de esa literatura escrita por mujeres a finales del siglo XX?
autoras que estamos viendo en letras inglesas, en honor a la actividad de hoy, digamos, británicas, de alguna manera, un surtido, porque manejan distintas cosas, desde Janet Richardson para todo lo que tiene que ver con cuestiones de sexualidad, de género. Tenemos escritoras involucradas con cuestiones políticas recientes. A Mónica Ali, por ejemplo, valdría mucho la pena. Tenemos Sadie Smith para textos postcoloniales. Angela Carter, hasta hace poco viva, sigue siendo una presencia muy interesante. Su forma de trabajar las novelas de crecimiento. Tenemos también J.S. Byatt y su hermana Margaret Rubble, que han trabajado mucho temas de clase social, que desde México nos resulta bastante interesante. Y por último, algo que creo que vale mucho la pena, es un género que en México manejamos poco, es la buena prosa de no ficción, que trabaja temas de psicoanálisis, de sexualidad, de feminismo, aquí representado por Susi Orba, y que establece diálogos muy interesantes con lo que se está escribiendo a nivel literario, ¿no? No sé, esto podría ser como una pequeña muestra, pero son quizás mis colegas británicas las que sabrían más que yo, ¿no?
Let's take this question first.
Okay, hello. I want to know how is it for a writer to write in this century? I mean, maybe you have more liberty about the subjects you write about, but also we live in a time in which it seems that people is not into reading just as much, because maybe it's easy just to go to the theater and watch a movie instead of taking the novel and reading it. So how do you deal as writers with that? That's it.
Well, I do think you want them to answer it, because here in Mexico you more or less know how things are. I do think it's more interesting for you to know from their point of view, or
Well, either one of those. I want to know how it's for a writer.
I find there are two things that happen to books written today. Either they are very huge with big letters and very easy to read, or they are very, very small and more with a better writing perhaps, but not as I don't think you could write War and Peace now, because I mean the one version of War and Peace, because there is no time. There is this interesting book, The Shallows, about how attention has been losing men attention because of the internet and the cellular phones and all the gadgets around the electrical things, and people are not able to concentrate as for a long period of time as they used to before. So I do think either the very chunky book or the very thin book with a better work. That I think that's what happens the way you think.
You write what you want to write, there is no other way.
I think it's it's a really difficult question because writers are now being seen as content providers rather than people with something to say. So there's the whole commercial, it's not that writing hasn't been commercial, but the way that one is asked to present oneself, for many of us, is at odds with the very process of writing. So at the same time, writers also need to get their work out. So writers do need to use new technology like Twitter, etc., in order to create a relationship with their readership in a way they never did before. So I think it's a very tricky moment and makes most people pretty damn uncomfortable. Certainly in my generation and above. I think the young women coming in, they feel a right to be ambitious writers, and then they also feel a right to be published. They're not really sure how to go about it because the market's also closing in one way.
Let's take another question. I'm going to take the gentleman at the back there.
Sí, gracias. Perdón, no me puedo levantar porque estoy grabando la plática. Yo le quisiera preguntar a las ponentes si, dado que estamos en México, bueno, voy a hacer la pregunta en español. Yo les quiero preguntar, sobre todo cuando se está hablando de género y de feminismo, y retomando lo que ahorita están comentando, que es precisamente arte, yo creo y pienso que cuando se está hablando de una perspectiva no nada más de género, sino una perspectiva humana, el trabajo entre hombres y mujeres en un proceso de creación, sea editorial o sea de algún otro ámbito, no necesariamente tiene que ver con esta división de separar siempre hombre o mujeres. Yo creo que a veces se debería de trascender eso. Las fotógrafas Mariana Jankowski y Graciela Iturbide, que son de las grandes exponentes que hay aquí en México, ellas dicen que escriben con luz a través de la fotografía y para ellas no hay problema cuando se les ha tratado de encasillar a veces en esta cuestión del género o del feminismo. Ellas dicen que precisamente ese trabajo es para completar las dos partes, hombre y mujer. Entonces, pues yo no sé qué piensan las autoras sobre esto. Creo que es un trabajo conjunto en donde los hombres y las mujeres se acompañan mutuamente en este proceso de creación. La literatura yo creo que es para leerse por las dos partes, ¿no? Y bueno, esa situación estadística que ustedes mencionaban, en Europa no sé qué tanto puede hacer aquí en México o en América. Gracias.
I think you must be living in a fantasy world. It's just complete and utter bollocks that men and women are working equally together in some lovely place where there's no competition and everybody's fine. That's not the world that we live in. This is crazy. Women here only got the vote 60 years ago. I cannot believe that you could say something like that in this company and expect it to be taken seriously. And in fact, I think only a man could say something as completely stupid as that.
Anyone else like to come back on that, or should we leave it there? I'm going to take another question from the front here.
The question is for Janet Winterson. I was thinking about what you said about women writers and male writers and how they shouldn't be taken because of their sex. And I was thinking, were you thinking about it when you wrote Written on the Body and having this narrator who you don't know if it's a woman or a man? It had to do with that? You had that discussion in mind when you were writing it, or was it something to do? It was something different when you were writing the novel, that particular novel.
Yeah, Written on the Body doesn't have a gendered narrator, which you can do in English because English isn't a gendered language. When it was published in other countries, what we did was we just kept swapping the pronoun around so that sometimes it read as male, sometimes it read as female, which made it look a bit trickier. than it does in English, where it's simply not said. But the reason for that was really to force the reader to look at their own assumptions about narrative and about how we operate in the world. So if something is being done by a man, does it have a different weight or a different resonance or a different feel than if it's done by a woman? Is it always the same act, or does the act or the behaviour change depending on who's doing the acting or the behaviour? I think it does. I think we read things differently. You know, we call women bossy and we call men assertive. You know, it's simple things like that. And it was something I wanted to do in the novel, just to really force the reader to think about it. And people do come up to me and they get very unsettled. They want to know. They say to me, well, you must have been thinking of a woman. And I say no. And then they say, well, were you thinking of a man? And it's interesting that it still really bothers people and they want to know. You know, and it's, when my godchildren were very small, we used to have a cat who was rather gay. I don't know if ever you've had a gay cat, but I had one at the time. And the kids used to get very cross about this, and they'd say, is Suchi a boy or a girl? And I'd say, well, you know, Suchi's a boy, but he behaves like a girl. And when people used to say, boy or girl, yes or no? And then she was 4 at the time. And that seems to be how we pass through life, with boy or girl, yes or no. You know, we really like to know who the speaker is. We like to know who it is in the book that we can either relate to or be angry with. You know, and if you take that away, it just forces things to be looked at a little bit differently. It's not the only point of the book by any means, but it was something that I wanted to do at that time, just to undermine these assumptions of gender.
We've got about 5 minutes left, so any other questions? There's a lady right here.
Thank you. Voy a hacer la pregunta en español and then I'll pose the question in English. Quería preguntar, en algún momento en el panel se mencionó Internet y quería ver si la publicación digital ha afectado o el número o tipo o gama de lectores, si tienen algún comentario sobre esto. At some point in the panel, Internet was mentioned, and I was wondering if digital publishing has affected in any way, positively or negatively, not the way you publish or write, but the array of readers maybe that access to your publications.
Yo acabo de leer en el suplemento Amelia del sábado pasado que por lo menos en las publicaciones españolas y en este caso de España aún no hay una marcada diferencia. El libro de papel, el libro tiene todavía una relevancia muy grande. ¿Qué suceda más adelante? Pues vaya, no es nada claro qué va a pasar, pero por lo pronto no creo que sí hay una serie de cuentos cortos, ahora sí hablo de México y Latinoamérica, cuentos que se publican vía internet en revistas o antologías que solamente aparecen así y que permiten a la gente dar a conocer su trabajo. Pero en este momento no creo que por lo menos en el habla española haya un crecimiento mayor.
I'm sure many people would say it's only a matter of time. Anyone else would like to come on electronic publishing?
No, I mean, I think everybody I know, writers and readers, has a Kindle, but also loves books. We're not of the generation that can read books on screen. So we have it. We're not at digital publishing. We're somewhere in the middle because we still like the physicality of the book and the idea, the picture of oneself sitting in a cozy corner with a book, even though we may be reading off a Kindle. But I don't think that's answering your question, because I think for a younger person, the kind of zines that are being produced by 20-year-olds are very imaginative. What they'll end up as, I have absolutely no idea. And they are completely screen-based youngsters. They don't have this difficulty with screens, where I will use them all day long to write my patient notes, to do emails, to write papers, to write journalism, to write books, but I don't bloody well want to read on the screen. But that is not the case for the next, for 2 generations down at all. So I don't feel in a position to answer.
Well, okay, there's one more question. It's 2 minutes of our end time, so let's try and make it as quick as possible.
I would like to know if you have read the article from The Atlantic, Why Women Still Can't Have It All, and how did you feel about it? I mean, this was a top politician, US politician, that recognizes several features that our generation are facing right now, but as writers, how are you dealing with this aspect and that sort of thing?
I didn't read the piece. I get it from the title. Most of us who were of the second wave feminism never ever thought you could have it all. In fact, we had a critique of having it all. We had a critique of masculinity entering as the way that women were going to restructure the world. We wanted to restructure the whole basis of work, the whole basis of childcare, domestic labor, the reproduction of life. So there was, the having it all was a neo-liberal nonsense that really didn't relate to my generation at all, and it was a terrible thing perpetrated on women, absolutely awful, because instead of allowing women to expand their experience, it produced a new version of privatizing women's difficulties, just as, because the women's liberation movement brought women together, and the idea of having it all put women in a profound competition, which is they have to have the briefcase, they have to have the high-paying job, the good-looking boyfriend or girlfriend, the designer children, the perfect home, the perfect clothes, the food. It was nothing, not to mention the body, nothing whatsoever to do with challenging humanity to have a different way of creating itself in the second part, or the latest part of the 20th century. So to me, it's one of those most awful, cruel things. I had a lot of different life in my life. I have raised children. I have been able to write and travel and do all kinds of things, and I've done that partly because I've had very profound friendships and networks of people who matter to me, not through networking, but because we actually mean something to each other, and because none of us tried to do it all at the same time. So I don't know what this politician is saying, and I feel like she's a Mary come lately, but frankly, it is absolutely horrible stuff, Superwoman, and it is a terrible fraud that is being perpetrated on young women. And it's absolutely hateful, and it's not really about revisioning the relations between the genders, and it's cruel, cruel, cruel.
On that very powerful note, I think unless anyone else would like to add their thoughts. Would you like to?
Yeah, just very briefly. We've tended to generalize all the time, which, okay, fine, but I do think that perhaps the story of feminism and further is not necessarily universal, and that in Mexico we've got to find our own way, listen to our own voices, and that even in Mexico it's not just one story. This is sort of coming back to the commentary of the back and Mariana Jampolsky, etc. They do have a strong, important story for us, and that might help to write our own story here.
Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you to our very esteemed panel.
been here in this very evocative and thought-provoking space. Thank you to the British Council for bringing everyone together in the first place. It's wonderful to see you all. Very good night. Keep reading.
I think they want to photograph us while they're being photographed. Quiero dar las gracias en nombre del Museo de la Mujer y en nombre de la Federación Mexicana de Universitarias, que tanto la doctora Feingold como yo representamos, por su presencia, por el entusiasmo de sus preguntas, y quiero agradecer al panel también el entusiasmo con el que han participado. On behalf of the Museum of Women and of the Mexican Federation of University Women, Dr. Feingold joins me in thanking you for being present and for making such a lively and entertaining panel, and very interesting for all of us. And we appreciate the help of the British Council to get this all together. Thank you very much.
Gracias.
Pero si quieres me vaya abajo para
Okay.